So this past weekend was New York Comic Con, and there was a lot of cool stuff going on there, a whole bunch of toy reveals, not much really on the Transformer side, but still from a lot of other properties. But the big takeaway from New York Comic Con as a Transformer fan was the very big Transformers Earthspark panel that they had there. A large majority of the voice actors were present, a lot of the creators, the directors, and this panel had a lot of insightful things that were shown, and a surprise at the end of it. They showed the very first episode to the audience there. Now, we had a member and longtime patron of the Transformers Slag podcast and longtime member of TFCon, Michael Underrave, was there. Local New Yorker, big fan of Transformers, and he relayed to us everything that was going on from that panel. Pretty much took the meeting minutes, I guess is the best way to put it. So we're going to get into that. There's a little bit of spoilery territory here, but it kind of gives us an idea of what we're going to be getting into with Transformers Earthspark come November on both Paramount Plus and on the Nickelodeon channel itself. So let's jump into that. The big thing that seems to be going around, and we'll get into it even deeper because it's straight out of the words of the writers from the show and stuff, is that this is a kind of pseudo sequel to Generation 1, the American cartoon. And there's a lot of little things that are peppered in there. We'll get into that, but that's something to really take away from that, is that this is in that continuity. It's obviously going to be a branched off continuity, a different version of it, but it's using that as the foundation of it. Kind of like how, Japan has their own G1 kind of split off, and we had our own. Like, we had G1 season 1, 2, and 3, obviously the 86 movie in there, and then you have Rebirth, and then that's kind of it for G1 America, and then you go into Beast Wars and ongoing from there. Where in Japan, they had season 1, season 2, Scramble City, the 86 movie. Season 3 was obviously called Transformers 2010, and then you had the Headmasters anime, Master Force, Victory Zone, and then the manga stuff, story pages. It goes on and on, of course, even with their own unique Beast Wars animation continuity stuff that also was part of their continuity. So this is going to be one of those cases where we're going to have a G1, that's G1 America's cartoon, and then it has a split off point where this continuity is a sequel in this kind of way that doesn't go, let's say, the other ways have gone up to this point. So that's something really interesting to take into a G1 sequel. That is not just like in the spirit of it, it legitimately is one. The town that all of this takes place in is the town of Witwicky. Is it just to be an homage, or is it actually named after maybe Spike becoming, the mayor of the town? Who knows, but we will find that out at some point. The directors and the writers said this show was heavily inspired by the vibes of E.T. and Iron Giant. So if you really like either one of those, I love Iron Giant, great movie, check it out. You'll get a lot of the vibes of that. That's kind of what they were going for. Again, it really is also trying to kind of show what the life is of all these characters after the Great War ended in season 4 of Rebirth, the golden age of Cybertron and where everyone went after that point. Pretty much there's this huge scene that was shown in the first episode that kind of explains a lot of that and, what happened to Bumblebee and everything, but I don't want to spoil too much of that. That's something that you guys will just see for the first time when you watch the show. The core focus, and we pretty much predicted this at this point, is going to be of that human family, the Multo family, and their 2 kids, Robbie and Mo. The main villain of the show, and this is the big twist that we also saw in the recent trailer that came out not long after New York Comic Con, was the main villain of the show is going to be Dr. Mandroid. He's this human that hates all Transformers. He believes they're all evil, and he needs to get rid of them. And that, we get this impression that he got hurt by them at some point. It's very similar to some of the previous evil doctors that we've had in Transformers fiction, where they got hurt by them, and then as a result he wants to get revenge on them, and Dr. Mandroid is another example of that. Now, there is some kind of implication that at some point he's going to get he's going to go crazy and then kind of believe he is a robot himself and kind of lead the Decepticons, but it's not 100% confirmed that. but he is the main villain of the show, at least initially for this season. As it comes to other leadership roles, it seems that Elita 1 is the standing second in command of the Autobots currently. So that's pretty interesting considering her absence in a majority of Generation 1 after her initial appearances. And now she is second in command of the Autobots. I guess now it's the Golden Age, and she was the leader of the Fembots back on Cybertron. Now that everyone's back home and everything's golden again, she is second in command. There's a whole bunch of GoBots Easter eggs in the background. I'll just mention one here. Apparently there's a truck with a trailer that says Stacks on the side. It's missing one of the X's on the side, but nice little nod to the GoBot Stacks. Pretty cool. They mentioned that what really also solidifies its connection is how one of the Molto family mentions how, like, everything, there's this whole explanation of the origin of the Great War, and they show this like brand new footage. It's brand new footage, but done in the style of the old Sunbow cartoon, showing the beginning of the Great War. And it all started on, September 14th, 1984. And that was, the beginning of the Great War. And of course, anyone who knows that date is one of the many dates of the first episode airing of Mortem Meets the Eye Parts 1, the beginning of the Generation 1 cartoon. A lot of cool stuff with that. I dig that. And again, a lot of that footage is shown. If you look carefully in those backgrounds, you see like even Jazz and Grimlock are there, obviously done in their Sunbow designs. Maybe that suggests that we might see those characters in the future. That would be cool. Because everyone that really appears in those cameos are also characters that do appear in the show. We see Elita 1 used a lot more. Again, she was a character that was used so sparingly in the original cartoon, and here she is in these brand new animation pieces done in the Sunbow animation style that, it could lead to maybe a Grimlock and Jazz at some point. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Those are top-tier characters, so it's a given. But what's also cool is, there's just this thing where it's like, there's this organization called Ghost, and they're going to be this agency that kind of, works with the Transformers to be kind of ambassadors for them and have a good relation with the humans of Earth. And Elita 1 is kind of that liaison of Ghost with Optimus Prime, so that she also has that role as second in command. The big twist of Megatron being an Autobot, and, whatever happened after Rebirth, clearly it didn't work out with the Nebulans and Lord Zarek, and he's now Megatron again after being Galvatron. We don't know how that's explained, but at some point we'll learn, hopefully, how that went down. He has a unique emblem on himself that both him and Optimus share that might be a little bit of a nod to the Japanese G2 explanation of when Autobots and Decepticons became one and Megatron and Optimus became standing leaders together, and they each had this like unique Autobot Decepticon amalgam logo and fancy capes. So maybe it's a nod to that, or maybe it's just a fancy coincidence. Decepticons still have a heavy presence in the show. Again, that emphasis on after the Great War. So even though the war is over, there's a lot of rogue Decepticons running around with no leader. So they're stealing Energon. They're trying to survive, and how that all goes down, we will learn about it. And again, that's pretty much, I don't want to go too deep into the first episode because there's a lot of cool stuff that goes on in it, and I want people to experience that for the first time. But that's kind of giving you the framework of what's going on here and the characters that will kind of appear. There still is some more that I didn't mention. But the idea and the concept of a sequel to Generation 1, and this idea, it's been done before in various forms and degrees. I mean, when Animated first debuted, the very first episode showed all this footage from G1's episode War Dawn, talking about the beginning before the Great War and stuff. And it was, early on, people thought it was implied that Animated was some kind of sequel to Generation 1. But then later on, it was just more, an homage, a tongue-in-cheek going, hey, let's show some old footage. But Animated really was its own continuity and its own thing, and its past was its own thing. And that War Dawn footage and everything was more just, I guess, homaging Generation 1, if anything else, and trying to show something that looked like propaganda footage rather than actual footage of the war back then. So that, Animated did that, but in the end it was its own thing. And even Transformers Armada, the director of Transformers Armada, back in New Type magazine issue number, I forget the issue number, but it was July 2003. I own that issue. And they talked with the main director, Hidehito Uda, and he said that originally when Armada was being developed, it was planned as a sequel to the very last season of Generation 1 in America, specifically Season 4 and those Rebirth three-parters. And when they were developing the very first episode of Armada, they were putting tons of Generation 1 animation models all over that opening scene. And if you go back and watch the first episode of Transformers Armada, there is so many cameos of Generation 1 characters. And then late into the development of Episode 2, they got word from Hasbro that things were going to be changed up and it was going to be more of a reboot instead of that of being a sequel. And so that's what ended up happening in the end. But you have to understand, at that time, especially when Armada was being developed, there really wasn't many reboots / alternate continuities in Transformers. It was a very rare kind of idea. You had the Generation 1 cartoon continuity, and then that kind of splinters off into Japanese continuity and American continuity. Meaning, American continuity ends with Rebirth, where Japan kept going, like I said before, with, all those things in Victory and Zone and ongoing. And then on the comic book side of things, it's kind of the same thing. You had the USA Marvel book, and then it kind of splinters into what the UK people were doing and what the US books were doing. And then you kind of got what the manga in Japan was doing, because the manga sometimes was being supplemental material for the cartoon, and then other times it was being its own thing, like the Master Force and Victory mangas. And of course the Beast Wars stuff was really its own thing, especially Beast Wars Neo. But in general, they kind of always just kind of had like their own continuities, and it very rarely was a big reboot. It didn't exist. It was always just G1 and variations of G1. There very rarely was a reboot. And Armada was the first time that's like, we're just going to do stuff from the ground up. So this is kind of back now to being, well, here's another splinter continuity using the foundation of Generation 1. And we don't know where this starts. The general consensus is this is after Season 4. This is after Rebirth, the golden age of Cybertron. So it continues after that. But stuff like Megatron and his designs might say otherwise. But we'll see. We'll see. It is very interesting. Not to mention, like, technically, we have, we have kind of this uncanny valley thing going on where, technically today, we're definitely way more ahead in the timeline than even the original Generation 1 cartoon was, because the year 2005 came and went. 2006 was technically what Season 3 was. It was 2010 in Japan. And then it was 2011 for Headmasters, or we're going to assume 2011 for, in the case of Season 4 of Rebirth. Did I say reboot? Rebirth. So much things going on in my head here. So that being said, we're already past the 2020s now at this point. So for them, I guess it's like, well, all that futuristic stuff and floating cars and exosuits, yeah, that didn't happen. And we're just kind of like where we are right now, and it's the year 2022 or 2023 by the time this show really airs in its full force. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they tell that story, and why things are the way, and seeing Spite Wickwiki, he does make a cameo in episode 1. I'll say that much. So it's very interesting. I like that. I like that a lot, that we're getting some kind of continuation of Generation 1 as opposed to reimaginations or reboots that we've been getting for so many years. And seeing where they tie that to things, where they bring it around, which characters will come back, and maybe the mention of those characters. If a character, again, I'm going to go to my boy Hot Rod, but if a character like Hot Rod shows up, is that history of him being a carrier of the Matrix of Leadership or something like that, is that going to be part of the story and remembered or referenced? That's some cool stuff if that's the case. Or a character like Starscream, he's absent in this show. He hasn't seen in the trailer or anything, because technically if it's the G1 continuity, he's dead, especially if we get into Beast Wars and he's doing transwarp stuff and going through time and space. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff. Then you have characters like Skywarp that are supposedly female. What's the explanation for that? Is it a different Skywarp? Is it a Skywarp that's female? Like, why Skywarp female now? So it's very interesting to see what's going on here. I'm very curious, very, very curious, but we'll see what happens. It's not too far away again, November 2022, both on Paramount Plus and on Nickelodeon. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens, but this is very fascinating to say the least. Could be absolutely amazing. Could be a bust of a series, but we will see when the time comes.